My name is Raina, and I'm 62 years old. The day my husband dismissed my pain as just a phase, he had no idea I was quietly gathering the evidence that would expose his affair and turn the courtroom against him, leading to a ruling he never imagined he'd face. If you had told me even 5 years ago that I would one day be questioning the marriage I had spent more than half my life building, I would have laughed in disbelief. But that was before the slow shift began, before the subtle silences replaced conversation, before the distance between us grew so wide I felt like I was living beside a stranger. Our home used to feel warm, lived in, familiar. Lately it felt more like a waiting room, a place where I lingered silently while my husband, Patrick, drifted further and further out of reach. At first I tried to excuse it. After all, we were getting older. Routines change, energy changes, priorities shift. But the problem wasn't aging. It was the tension that crept into every room we shared. Each time I asked why he was coming home later, or why he never joined me for dinner anymore, he brushed me off like I was being clingy. He used words like nagging and suffocating, words he'd never used with me in our entire marriage. The more I tried to understand what was happening, the more he deflected, wrapping his excuses in sarcasm or irritation. Then came the changes I couldn't ignore. New clothes, stylish and far younger than anything he had worn in decades, a sleek new cologne that smelled expensive and foreign, an obsessive commitment to the gym that seemed to have sprung out of nowhere. The phone that once sat openly on the counter was now glued to his hand or slipped instantly into his pocket the moment I entered the room. Every change was a small alarm bell ringing inside me, but each time I brought it up, he dismissed me with the same coldness that had become his default tone. The moment everything cracked was a Tuesday evening. I was standing in the kitchen, making dinner, when he finally came home. Late again. His shirt smelled like that cologne, and he didn't even bother giving me a reason. When I asked why he never looked at me anymore, never spoke to me, never touched me unless it was obligatory, he laughed. Actually laughed. A sharp, careless sound that cut into me like a blade. "Raina," he said, shaking his head like I was some confused child, "you're overreacting. You're going through a phase. Women your age get emotional." He waved his hand vaguely, as if sweeping away my humanity with a gesture. "It'll pass." A phase. That was how he reduced my pain, my fear, my loneliness, my instincts, to a passing inconvenience, as if I were a storm cloud drifting temporarily over the life he wanted to keep sunny and uncomplicated. I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation, but I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, something inside me hardened. I excused myself, walked upstairs, and sat on the edge of our bed with a notebook. That night, for the first time, I began journaling his behaviors. Not emotionally, factually. Dates, times, comments, unusual routines. I didn't even fully understand why I was doing it, but instinctively it felt necessary. A record of something I didn't yet have the courage to name. Over the next few weeks, the diary filled faster than I expected. My friends, those who knew me well enough to see the heaviness in my face, began asking questions. I told them pieces, never the full picture, because part of me still hoped I was wrong. But each time one of them said, "Raina, trust your instincts," something inside me tightened. I also started doing something I never thought I'd do in my life: documenting finances, bank statements, insurance papers, property documents, all things we had always shared without secrecy. It felt invasive, wrong even, but the unease in my chest pushed me forward. I didn't know what I was preparing for. I only knew I needed to be ready. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up around midnight to get a glass of water and heard Patrick whispering intensely in the hallway. His voice was low, soft, intimate. He didn't know I was awake. I stayed still, listening, not to catch every word, but because the tone alone told me more than any sentence could. It was the kind of voice a man uses when he wants to be heard only by the person he desires. My stomach twisted. Every uneasy moment, every ignored instinct, every dismissive comment, it all converged in that instant. Something was terribly wrong. I realized then that I couldn't just sit and wait for answers to fall into my lap. I needed truth, even if it shattered me. So I made a decision, one that terrified me as much as it steadied me. And a week later, when he grabbed his keys and told me he'd be working late again, I followed him. My heart thudded with a mix of dread and determination as I trailed his car across town. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when he finally parked and stepped out of the vehicle. What I witnessed next nearly knocked the breath out of my chest. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers went numb as I followed Patrick's car through neighborhoods I didn't recognize. He drove without hesitation, as if he'd made this trip many times before. My headlights were far enough back not to draw suspicion, but every turn he made felt like another twist in my stomach. I kept telling myself I could still be wrong, that I might arrive at some completely innocent conclusion. But instinct has a way of whispering the truth long before your mind is willing to accept it. He finally pulled into a parking lot belonging to a small, dimly lit restaurant tucked between a boutique florist and a wine shop. It wasn't anywhere near his office. It wasn't on the way to any work-related meeting he'd ever mentioned. This place had the kind of warm amber lighting that suggested romance more than business. I parked far enough away to stay hidden and watched as he stepped out of his car, smoothing the front of his shirt and checking his reflection in the window. My heart pounded painfully. He looked excited, nervous, like a man on the edge of something thrilling. A few minutes later, she appeared. She was younger, much younger than I expected. Beautiful in that effortless, polished way that belongs to people who haven't yet learned how cruel the world can be. Her strides were confident, and she smiled up at him like she already knew she belonged there. They greeted each other with a familiarity that made my chest ache. She touched his arm lightly, and he leaned in as if drawn to her orbit. I felt myself sinking into the seat, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering. My hands trembled as I lifted my phone and snapped a picture, and then another, and another. Evidence I never wanted, but suddenly needed. They went inside the restaurant, and I followed on foot, stopping short of the windows where I could see into the softly lit interior. They were seated in a booth near the back, close enough to touch constantly, and they did. She laughed loudly at everything he said, tossing her hair back, her whole face glowing with a kind of admiration he hadn't shown me in years. He looked alive, animated, eager. Then it happened, the moment that stripped away the last thread of denial in me. He reached across the table and intertwined his fingers with hers, not casually, not awkwardly, but with the comfort of someone who had done it many times. She traced small circles on the back of his hand with her thumb, and he leaned forward, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, an intimate gesture so gentle it knocked the breath from me. That was the moment I knew. Knew this wasn't recent. Knew this wasn't accidental. Knew this wasn't some flirtation he'd gotten swept up in by mistake. This was deliberate. This was ongoing. This was betrayal. My knees weakened. My throat tightened so sharply I could barely swallow. But I forced myself to raise my phone again and take more photos, my hands trembling so violently I had to steady them against the cold brick wall outside the window. My entire body felt foreign, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart from a distance. After several minutes, I couldn't bear to watch anymore. I backed away from the window and walked toward my car, each step heavier than the last. Once inside, I locked the doors automatically, though I didn't even know why. I sat there in the dark, my breath fogging the windshield as a wave of sorrow, anger, humiliation, and numb clarity washed over me all at once. For a long time, I couldn't even turn the ignition. I just stared at my trembling hands, feeling like every memory I'd built with him was rearranging itself in my mind, 20-plus years of marriage, suddenly reinterpreted through the lens of deceit. I sobbed silently until there were no tears left, only hollowed-out disbelief. Eventually, I drove home on autopilot, the photographs on my phone burning in my mind like open flames. I got inside the house, wiped my face, and climbed into bed. When I heard his car pull into the driveway nearly an hour later, I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. He walked into the bedroom, humming softly, as if he'd just had a pleasant evening. He changed clothes quietly, slipped into bed beside me, and immediately began texting someone. His screen tilted away from my direction. The faint glow illuminated his face, and the gentle smile he wore while typing made my stomach churn. I knew exactly who he was texting, and in that moment, lying beside the man who still smelled like the perfume of another woman, I understood there was no salvaging what we once had. Something fundamental had shattered beyond repair. But knowing was one thing. Acting on it required strength I wasn't sure I had, yet. Still, when the sun rose the next morning, I felt something shift inside me, a resolve, a clarity sharper than anything I'd felt in years. And with hands steadier than I expected, I picked up my phone and made a single call that would change the trajectory of everything. I should have expected the moment to come, but when it finally did, it still hit me like a slow, icy wave. It was a quiet Sunday morning, one of those mornings where the house felt too still, the kind of stillness that presses against your skin. Patrick walked into the living room with an exaggerated calmness, the kind he always adopted when he was about to lie. He sat across from me, hands clasped, eyes lowered like he was practicing empathy rather than feeling it. "Raina," he began softly, I think I need to move out for a while." For a moment, I simply blinked. Not because I was surprised, but because I needed to make sure I controlled every inch of my expression. I couldn't let him see what I truly knew, or what I'd already planned. "Move out?" I repeated, letting my voice sound small, confused. "What do you mean?" He sighed dramatically, as though he were the exhausted victim in all this. "Just for a bit. Just a break. Things have been tense. And honestly, I think you've been under a lot of stress. We both have." He paused, studying my face. "Maybe some space will help you calm down." Calm down. Space. For me. It took everything in me not to laugh bitterly. Instead, I lowered my gaze, nodded slowly, and whispered, "If that's what you think is best." He perked up instantly. It was incredible, really. How quickly he brightened at the idea that I wouldn't fight him. He looked relieved, almost triumphant, as if he'd expected tears, pleading, drama. But I gave him none of it. I let him believe his script was working. "This isn't permanent," he assured me, leaning forward like he was offering comfort. "It's just temporary. You need time to work on yourself, to figure out what's going on emotionally. I'll still be here for you." Work on myself, as though his betrayal was my personality flaw. I nodded again, keeping my breathing steady. "I understand." He exhaled like a man who just solved a great burden. Little did he know that his relief fueled my resolve more than any anger ever could. He spent the afternoon packing, not all his belongings, just enough to maintain the illusion of a short break. A few bags, a stack of shirts, his laptop, toiletries. He moved with an air of self-importance, as if stepping into a more enlightened version of himself. I watched quietly, pretending sadness, letting my shoulders slump, letting him see exactly what he wanted to see. Because the more defeated I looked, the more confident he became. And a confident man makes reckless mistakes. Before he left, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Use this time to reflect, okay? Maybe take some classes, get out of the house more, work on you." I almost choked at the absurdity, but I lifted my eyes, forced a quiver into my voice, and said softly, "I'll try." That was apparently enough to inflate his ego to full capacity. He walked out the front door with the swagger of a man who believed he had just handed me a gift. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, the false sadness evaporated from my face. I locked the door, exhaled, and began searching the house for anything he might have left behind. He had, plenty, financial records, old tax returns, updated pay stubs he'd printed and forgotten to take, bank statements tucked into a drawer. There was even a folder containing information about an investment account I didn't know existed, one he'd apparently opened several months ago. I scanned, photographed, and copied everything, methodically and silently, like someone performing a sacred ritual. My hands moved with purpose, steadier than they had been in weeks. Every document felt like a small brick being added to the fortress I was building around my future. By the time I was done, I felt different, stronger, clearer. I wasn't the woman he dismissed anymore. I wasn't the fragile wife overwhelmed by emotion. I was the woman awakening after a long, painful sleep. I waited. Days passed, and then weeks. Patrick settled into his so-called temporary apartment, though from the social media footprint he didn't realize he was leaving behind. It looked far more like a permanent escape. Photos from restaurants, from bars, from places he never took me. And though I refused to torture myself by looking too closely, I noticed the edges of another person appearing in the background of some pictures. A younger woman's silhouette, her handbag, her hair. He was getting comfortable. Very comfortable. And that was exactly what my lawyer needed. When I walked into her office with the stack of documents and the evidence of the affair, she smiled, like a strategist who had just been handed the final piece of a puzzle. "Now," she said, tapping the papers, "the timing is perfect." The next morning, with the sun barely rising, I held the divorce papers in my hands. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with certainty, with liberation. I signed them, and when the process server delivered those papers to Patrick later that day, his reaction was nothing like what I expected. I wasn't there when the process server knocked on Patrick's apartment door, but I almost wish I had been. I imagine him opening it with that smug half-smile he'd adopted since moving out, thinking the world revolved around his newfound freedom, only for the server to hand him the thick envelope with my signature on the last page. I imagine the moment it clicked, the moment he realized I wasn't waiting for him to come back. I wasn't crying, I wasn't clinging, I wasn't broken, I was done. The first sign of the explosion came 5 minutes later, when my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring twice before answering, steadying my breath. His voice came barreling through the line like a cracked whip. "Raina, what the hell is this?" he shouted. "You filed for divorce without talking to me, without even warning me?" I leaned back in my chair, swirling the tea I hadn't touched. "Patrick," I said calmly, "I did talk to you. You just never listened." He scoffed so loudly I had to pull the phone away. "Oh, cut the theatrics. This is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. Vindictive." His voice sharpened. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" There it was. Not how it hurt him. How it made him look. I felt the corners of my mouth lift, just slightly. "If you're worried about appearances," I replied, "you should have thought about that before sneaking around." A brief silence followed, one thick enough to feel like a presence between us. Then his anger erupted. "You think you're going to win? You think the court will just hand you everything because you're crying and journaling and imagining things? I'll fight you on this. I'm not giving you anything." "You're welcome to fight," I said. "I'm prepared." The line went dead. For the next few days, he made good on his threat. He refused mediation, refused to negotiate, refused even to look at the documents his own attorney sent him. He believed, truly believed, that the law would favor him, that he could charm a judge the way he charmed that young woman. He believed I'd crumble, that I'd come crawling back the moment things became difficult. But every step he took was based on the same fatal mistake he'd been making for years. He underestimated me, and apparently so did she, the mistress. I discovered that after overhearing one of Patrick's voicemails, left accidentally. I shouldn't have listened, but curiosity is a wicked thing. Her voice was bright and confident as she encouraged him to stand firm and not let her scare you. She said I wouldn't go through with it. She said I didn't have it in me. A hollow laugh escaped me when the message ended. They truly had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. When our first formal meeting was scheduled, I arrived early with my attorney, who greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile. She was meticulous and fierce, exactly the kind of woman I needed at my side. We sat at a long conference table, stacks of documents arranged neatly between us. Then Patrick walked in. The moment he saw me, his shock flickered into indignation. He expected a broken wife, not the composed woman sitting upright, documents organized, eyes calm. The mistress hadn't come with him, but her fingerprints were all over his arrogance. His lawyer, an older man with tired eyes, looked less certain. The instant the meeting started, it was clear why. My attorney laid out everything, not emotionally, not desperately, but with precision. She presented the financial discrepancies first, the hidden account, the undeclared transfers, the unexplained withdrawals. Patrick shifted uncomfortably, his jaw flexing. He kept glancing at his lawyer as though expecting him to jump in and save him. But the man just scribbled notes, his eyes narrowing further with each revelation. Then came the photos. The restaurant, the hand-holding, the intimate gestures, the truth. Patrick's face drained of color as my attorney slid the images across the table. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, like a fish gasping for air. "You have no proof, he began. "She does," his lawyer interrupted quietly, the first time he'd spoken. "She has plenty." Patrick glared at him, betrayed. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of the law," his lawyer said flatly. It was the first time I'd ever seen Patrick truly rattled. The meeting grew tense, heated on his end, methodical on ours. The more he tried to shout, deflect, or accuse, the deeper he dug himself into a hole. His lawyer kept pinching the bridge of his nose, exhaling slowly, clearly rethinking the entire case strategy. Finally, after an hour, the judge called for a short break before the next session. People filed out to stretch their legs, grab coffee, make calls. Patrick stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. I stayed seated, exhaling slowly. My attorney leaned closer, her eyes sharp with a satisfaction she didn't bother to hide. "Raina," she whispered, tapping one perfectly manicured nail against the stack of documents. "He just made the biggest mistake possible." Courtrooms have a strange kind of silence, cold, still, and almost surgical. That morning, as I sat behind the polished wooden table beside my attorney, I felt that stillness seep into my bones. Not fear, not anxiety, just a heavy, almost surreal anticipation. Across the aisle, Patrick straightened his tie with exaggerated confidence, like a man preparing to charm an entire jury with nothing but a well-practiced smile. He really believed he could talk his way out of anything, but the court wasn't his living room, and I wasn't the woman he once talked over so easily. As proceedings began, his attorney called him to the stand first. It was a strategic move. Control the narrative early, paint him as the rational party, hope that framing would stick. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, and settled into the witness chair with a posture that screamed arrogance. "Mr. Langford," the judge began, "did you engage in a romantic or intimate relationship with anyone outside your marriage?" Patrick's answer came without hesitation. Absolutely not. A lie delivered with confidence is still a lie. My attorney didn't flinch. Instead, she reached calmly into the binder between us and stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we'd like to present evidence contradicting the witness's statement." The bailiff carried the manila folder to the judge. The moment the first photograph appeared on the screen, the one of Patrick holding hands with the younger woman across that restaurant table, the courtroom grew so quiet I could hear my own breath. Patrick froze. His lawyer closed his eyes in defeat. "Mr. Langford," the judge said, his voice noticeably cooler, "do you wish to amend your testimony?" Patrick stammered. This is taken out of context. It wasn't under oath, the judge reminded sharply. A bead of sweat slid down Patrick's temple. "Fine, I knew her, but it wasn't what it looks like." My attorney rose again. "Your Honor, we also have timestamps, corresponding credit card statements, and additional photographs that indicate this was not an isolated encounter." The judge's irritation deepened. He leaned back, arms folded. "Mr. Langford, this is your opportunity to be honest with the court." But Patrick being honest had never been his strength. Instead, he floundered, scrambling to repaint the narrative with half-truths and shaky explanations. And every time he tried, the evidence unraveled him further. Then came the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated. His mistress was subpoenaed. She walked into the courtroom looking far less confident than I remembered from the restaurant window. Her gaze darted nervously around the room, avoiding mine, avoiding Patrick's. When she was sworn in, her voice trembled slightly. His lawyer questioned her first, trying to establish an innocent connection, but every vague answer she gave contradicted Patrick's earlier lies. Then my attorney approached for cross-examination. "Miss Rowan," she began gently, Were you aware that Mr. Langford was married during your involvement? The woman hesitated. Too long. He told me they were separated. He told the court under oath that he was not romantically involved with you, my attorney responded. Which version is the truth? Miss Rowan's eyes widened. She fumbled, contradicted herself twice in under a minute, and delivered a series of inconsistent statements that only deepened the cracks in Patrick's defense. By the time she stepped down, the damage was irreversible, but it didn't end there. My attorney wasn't done. She pulled out another folder, the one with Patrick's financial inconsistencies. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to present evidence regarding hidden accounts and large, unexplained transfers made during the months leading up to Mr. Langford's departure from the marital home. Patrick's head snapped toward his attorney. What is she talking about? His attorney sighed, clearly aware of what was coming. The documents you didn't disclose, he muttered under his breath. The judge reviewed the statements, his jaw tightening. Mr. Langford, he said, failure to disclose assets is a serious offense. Patrick looked like he'd been slapped. Meanwhile, my attorney spoke with a steady confidence that made my chest swell with pride. Not arrogance, but relief. After the years I had spent invisible, dismissed, talked over, here in this courtroom, my truth finally had weight. She explained my decades of unpaid labor, raising our children, managing our home, supporting his career while setting my own ambitions aside. She laid out the timeline of his affair and his financial deceit. She requested spousal support proportional to the length of our marriage and the imbalance in our incomes. The judge listened intently, his expression softening each time she spoke about my contributions, and hardening each time she revealed another omission from Patrick's disclosures. By the time closing arguments approached, even Patrick seemed to understand the gravity of what he'd done. The bravado was gone. The confidence had dissolved. His foot tapped anxiously beneath the table, and he tugged at his tie like it was choking him, because he realized, finally, that he wasn't just losing the narrative. He was losing far more than he ever imagined. The judge cleared his throat, shuffled some papers, and adjusted his glasses. After reviewing all evidence, he began slowly, I am prepared to deliver my ruling. My heart thudded. Patrick stiffened, and then the judge began reading the numbers. Numbers so staggering I felt the ground tilt beneath me. When the judge began reading the ruling, I felt as though the entire courtroom shrank around me, every sound muted except for his voice. Patrick leaned forward slightly, his jaw set, his eyes narrowed, still clinging to the belief that he could somehow charm logic, law, and truth into bending his way. He had no idea what was coming. Given the length of the marriage, the judge said, the documented financial disparity, the established evidence of infidelity, and the misconduct demonstrated in this courtroom. He paused, scanning the room before landing his gaze firmly on Patrick. I am awarding long-term spousal support to Mrs. Langford. The air shifted. It was subtle but sharp, like a collective inhale from everyone present. In total, the judge continued, flipping to the next page, Mr. Langford will pay $310,000 in structured alimony over the designated period. I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I didn't even blink. I simply sat still as the words settled over me like warm sunlight after a storm. But Patrick broke. His face paled so dramatically that even his lawyer reached out to steady him. His eyes widened, confused and horrified, as if he believed he must have misheard. What? Your Honor, that can't be right, he stammered. That's outrageous. That's impossible. The judge didn't flinch. It is the court's decision, and it is final. Patrick sputtered. But she doesn't deserve. He stopped only when the judge raised a hand sharply. Mr. Langford, sit down. The courtroom fell silent again, but this time it was Patrick who seemed swallowed by the stillness. He looked disoriented, wounded in a way I had never seen before. And for once, it wasn't my job to comfort him. It wasn't my job to shrink, to apologize, to soften myself to make him feel larger. This time, I simply watched. When the judge dismissed us, people began filing out, whispering quietly. Patrick remained frozen in his seat for several seconds before stumbling to his feet. His lawyer murmured something about next steps, but Patrick wasn't listening. His eyes were unfocused, darting around the room as though trying to grasp the last remnants of the control he'd lost. I stood, smoothing the front of my jacket, and walked past him without looking back. But as I reached the hallway, I heard him call after me. "Raina!" His voice cracked. Not in sadness, but in desperation. I turned slowly. He pushed through the double doors and approached me, his expression a mixture of panic and indignation. "You can't do this to me," he hissed. "You're ruining me. My life, my finances, everything." I held his gaze steadily, feeling a deep, unshakable calm settle in my chest. "Patrick," I said softly, "I didn't ruin anything. You made your choices." His mouth opened, ready to spit another accusation, but nothing came out. Instead, his shoulders sagged. His anger collapsed into fear. And standing there, watching him unravel, I realized something that felt strangely liberating. He was finally facing the consequences of a story he wrote himself. "Maybe we can work something out privately," he tried again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Just you and me. No lawyers. I can give you something reasonable, but this is insane." "No," I said simply. "What's done is done." And with that, I walked away. As I stepped out of the courthouse, a breeze swept across my face, carrying the scent of wet pavement and the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in years, the air felt breathable, clear, honest. My attorney walked beside me, offering a warm, proud smile. "You did incredibly well, Raina. Most people would have buckled long before today." I nodded, still overwhelmed but grounded. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." She touched my shoulder gently. "You fought for yourself. I just helped organize the paperwork." A quiet laugh escaped me. It felt foreign at first, like it belonged to someone I hadn't been in a long time. But it was mine, completely mine. As I got into my car, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I saw someone who had been dismissed, belittled, ignored, and who had risen anyway. Someone who had walked through humiliation and betrayal, but found her footing again. Someone who had survived. Now finally I could begin rebuilding my life on my own terms. No apologies, no shrinking, no silence. The next few months passed in a blur of transition, changing accounts into my name, adjusting my finances, reclaiming the space in my home that once felt suffocating. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. Mine. Then one afternoon, several months after the verdict, my phone buzzed with a notification, a message from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, my heart stopped. It was from his mistress. For a long moment, I simply stared at the unknown number on my phone, watching the text preview blink on the screen. My first instinct was to delete it without opening it, a reflexive desire to protect my hard-earned peace. But curiosity, that old familiar tug, urged me forward. After everything I had survived, what more could possibly shake me? I opened the message. "Hi, Raina. I know this is strange, but I didn't know who else to talk to. It's Maya." My eyes narrowed. Maya, the younger woman from the restaurant. The woman who had held my husband's hand as though he belonged to her. The woman who had laughed at his jokes, traced circles on his skin, helped unravel the last threads of my marriage. I expected anger to flare, or bitterness, or at least irritation. Instead, I felt nothing. Just stillness. Another message followed, almost immediately. "I'm not reaching out to cause trouble. I need to tell you something, please." Against my better judgment, I typed back, "What do you want to tell me?" Her response came like a dam breaking. "He lied to me too." My brow furrowed as I sank into my kitchen chair. She went on, "He told me you two were practically separated already. He told me you didn't care about him. He told me he was planning to retire early and that we'd travel, that he had money saved. All these promises. None of it was true." I stared at the message, feeling a strange mix of vindication and detachment. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even spite, but instead, it felt like watching the end of a movie I'd already emotionally disconnected from. Another message. "He's been furious since the court ruling. Angry all the time. Bitter. He blames you. And he blames me. He says we ruined his life. I let out a slow breath. Patrick blaming everyone but himself was the least surprising part of this entire saga. He's impossible to be around now, she continued. Nothing is ever his fault. He snaps at me for everything. I don't even recognize the man I thought I was seeing. I typed back carefully. Maya, whatever is going on between you two is not my responsibility. I'm not trying to be harsh, but I'm not part of that relationship. Her reply came quickly. I know, I'm leaving him. I should have left months ago. I was stupid. I thought he would be different with me. I'm so sorry, Raina. Truly, I never should have been involved. I didn't understand the real situation until it was too late. I stared at her words for a long moment. Apologies can be tricky things, sometimes healing, sometimes manipulative, sometimes meaningless, but something about her message didn't feel self-serving. She sounded tired, defeated, as if she'd finally reached the end of a story she had walked into blindly. I typed one simple response. Thank you for apologizing. I didn't owe her forgiveness, but I owed myself closure. And acknowledging her remorse without dragging myself back into the emotional mess was part of that. She continued anyway, her conscience apparently needing to empty itself. I need to tell you one more thing. Patrick. He regrets underestimating you. He said it himself. He thought you'd fall apart. He thought you'd never go through with the divorce. He's been saying he misjudged you completely. For the first time since her messages began, something actually stirred inside me. Not sadness, not pride, but a quiet, settled understanding. I had moved on, truly moved on. His regret had nothing to do with me. It didn't define me. It didn't validate me. It was simply another consequence he had earned. Thank you for telling me, I typed. I hope you rebuild your life too. There was a pause, then her final message arrived. I hope you stay far away from him, Raina, because he's getting desperate. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. After I set my phone down, I walked to the window and looked out at my backyard. The small garden I had tended for years, the one place that had always felt like mine. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow across the grass. For the first time in a long while, I truly felt the quiet, not as emptiness, but as peace. The chaos was no longer mine. The guilt was no longer mine. The responsibility was no longer mine. I was free. Weeks passed after that exchange with no further contact from Maya. I focused on my life, my routines, my healing, the quiet, rebuilding of a future I never expected to rewrite at this age. And every day, I felt a little lighter. Until one evening. I came home from grocery shopping, set my bags on the counter, and noticed a message on my voicemail, one from a number I hadn't seen in months. And the moment I pressed play, I recognized the voice instantly. Patrick. His tone was strained, shaky, eerily urgent, and his message made it clear. He was about to attempt one last desperate move to change everything. I replayed his voicemail 3 times before deleting it, not because I was confused by what he wanted, but because I wanted to be absolutely certain of one thing. I felt nothing. No fear, no ache, no longing, just a quiet certainty that whatever storm Patrick was attempting to drag me back into was no longer mine to weather. But certainty didn't stop him from trying. It happened the following Saturday. The morning was peaceful, sunlight drifting into the living room, a mug of tea in my hands, my favorite soft music playing in the background. I had finally reclaimed my weekends, no longer tiptoeing around someone else's moods or schedules. For once, I felt the rare and sacred luxury of being entirely alone with myself. Then came the knock. It wasn't timid, it wasn't loud, it was deliberate, the kind of knock from someone who expects to be let in. I froze for only a second before setting my cup down and walking to the door. When I opened it, there he was. Patrick. Older looking. Thinner. A tension in his face I had never seen before. His eyes flicked to mine with a blend of desperation and misplaced confidence, as though he still believed he could sway me with enough charm or pity. Raina, he said softly, can we talk? I didn't step aside. I didn't invite him in. I simply nodded once, keeping the door only halfway open. He swallowed hard, glancing briefly at the space behind me, as though expecting to find remnants of the life he once controlled. "I've made mistakes," he began. "Big ones." I said nothing. He shifted, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets, like a man trying to appear smaller, more sympathetic. "I didn't think things would go this far," he admitted. "The divorce, the money, everything that's happened. I wasn't expecting it." "So you didn't expect consequences," I said quietly. He blinked, taken aback. "That's not what I meant. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I've been lonely, Raina, and stressed. I can barely keep up with the payments, and Maya, she left. I'm going through hell." A flicker of his old self slipped through, his belief that suffering entitled him to sympathy, that pain granted him access back into places he had burned down. "I thought maybe," he continued, lowering his voice, "we could start over, try again. We were good together once. Maybe we could fix things." I watched him carefully. His eyes weren't pleading out of love. They were pleading out of fear. Fear of bills, fear of responsibility, fear of facing the life he built without someone to cushion his falls. "Patrick," I said gently but firmly. "No." He stiffened. "No? Just no?" "I'm not starting over with you," I said. "I'm not sacrificing my peace for anyone ever again, especially not someone who treated me like I was a phase." He flinched. The memory of that moment, the dismissive wave of his hand, the tone he used to belittle my instincts, flashed across his face, his bravado cracked. "Raina, please," he whispered. "I'm losing everything." "You're losing the things you chose," I replied. "Your actions caught up with you. That isn't my burden to carry." His breath hitched, his shoulders curled inward. The man who once walked with such arrogance, who once dictated every narrative, now sagged like a deflated version of himself. He wasn't angry anymore. He was broken in a way I couldn't fix and didn't want to. For the first time in decades, he had no control over me, and he knew it. He stared at me for a long, heavy moment, searching for some small crack in my resolve. But there wasn't one. When he finally understood that, truly understood it, I watched a tear slip down his cheek. Not for me, for himself. I felt nothing but relief. "Goodbye, Patrick," I said softly, and with that I closed the door. The click of the latch sounded final, almost ceremonial. I stood there for a moment, hand resting against the cool wood, breathing in the enormity of what had just happened. I didn't shake. I didn't question myself. I didn't second-guess the woman I had finally become. Instead, I walked back into my living room, lifted my cup of tea, and sat down as sunlight filtered across the floorboards. The same sun, the same house, the same woman, yet everything had changed. I reflected on all the ways he had dismissed me, ignored me, minimized me, how he had called my instincts a phase, as though my voice were a temporary inconvenience. That single moment, once so painful, had become the spark that ignited everything, my boundaries, my courage, my awakening. I wasn't the woman he left behind. I wasn't the woman he betrayed. I wasn't the woman he thought he could control. I was someone new, someone whole, someone free. And as I sipped my tea, feeling the weight of my old life finally fall away, I knew one thing for certain. My new life, independent, unapologetic, and entirely my own, was just beginning. My ex-husband walked away that day, burdened by the consequences he created, and I stepped into a future where my voice would never again be dismissed, silenced, or ignored. In the end, walking away from him wasn't the hardest part. Realizing how long I had lived without peace was. Taking back my life felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shadows. Every choice he made eventually led him to the consequences he feared most, while every choice I made led me back to myself. Freedom didn't come quickly, but it came honestly. And now I can't help wondering, if someone dismissed your feelings like a phase, what would you do? If this story made you pause, breathe, or look at your own strength differently, then stay with me. I have many more true journeys like this to share. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps more women find their voice again. And if anything here touched your heart, I'd love to hear your thoughts below.